tuning in this evening to join us for the City of Everett's Virtual Housing Forum. I apologize for the delay, but we've ironed out our technical difficulties, I hope, and so we're really fortunate to have former Governor Christine Gregoire here as our keynote speaker. But before I introduce her, I wanted to take a few moments to outline our format for the evening, and then I'll share a few remarks to set the stage. This forum is the kickoff to our public engagement process for our Rethink Housing Action Plan project. This is the first of 3 forums we've planned to help inform the community about the housing issues, challenges, and opportunities facing Everett now and into our future. The forums are intended to be informational, so there will not be a Q&A session. After Governor Gregoire shares her remarks, I will ask her a few prepared questions, and then we'll outline next steps and adjourn. The forum is being recorded and will be posted on the City of Everett website for viewing later as well. In addition to these forums, we're organizing a series of chat virtual meetings over the next 6 months. During these chats, we'll invite the community to interact with us directly about housing in Everett. Our theme this evening is housing for all. I believe that having access to quality housing for everyone at all income levels is vital to a thriving, healthy, and economically sustainable community. One of our key priorities at the city is working to ensure we have more housing that everyone can afford, housing that creates equitable opportunities to live in all of our city's beautiful neighborhoods. Over the past several years, we've been facing a housing shortage crisis in Everett, along with the rest of the Puget Sound region. This housing shortage significantly impacts our lower income residents. Many of our working middle income residents have few market rate housing choices available to them that would allow them to climb that housing ladder to home ownership. And the COVID pandemic has impacted our livelihoods for most of this year and has only made things worse. Housing is personal, and issues related to housing can be complicated and controversial. And it is so important now more than ever that we do this work. I recently issued a housing directive to support and build on our work on housing, and I look forward to tackling that work together with our council and community. The directive tasks staff with improving our procedures and permitting requirements. It directs and outlines our efforts to address homelessness and support housing stability. And it directs staff to implement the Rethink Housing Project engagement process and develop a citywide housing action plan by June of this next year. So as I mentioned, this forum tonight is the kickoff for that work and engagement process. We're in the early stages of putting our initiatives into action, and you'll hear more about them over our Rethink Housing Education series. And so now it's my honor to introduce our very special guest, former Governor Christine Gregoire. As many of you may recall, Chris Gregoire served for 2 terms as our governor. Her many accomplishments of governor include creating a Department of Early Learning and leading reforms to the K-12 system and investment in higher education, investing in infrastructure, including the building of our largest floating bridge in the world and the largest transportation tunnel to open up on Seattle's waterfront. She led a historic number of trade missions, did reforms to the foster care system to protect children, and she was among the first to lead in healthcare reform. And that's just a few of the highlights from her tenure in office. Now she serves as the CEO for Challenge Seattle. Challenge Seattle is an alliance of CEOs from 17 of the region's largest private sector employers who work together to ensure the greater Seattle area continues to thrive as one of the most vibrant, innovative, and globally competitive regions in the world. And she's here to share insights and expertise on housing for all and why housing it should be affordable to everyone, and that's so vital to our communities. And so with that, it's my honor to give Chris a very warm welcome. Governor, thank you for joining us today.
Mayor, thank you. It is a delight for me to be with you. My husband's from Everett, an Everett High School grad, so I can never say no to you or anybody in Everett. Thanks for the invitation. I look forward to the evening with you. This issue of affordable housing is one that is just front and center for everybody, as you mentioned, Mayor, in the Puget Sound region. There's been a lot of focus and a lot of attention on homelessness, as there should be, on low-income housing, as there should be. But if you could please put up the slide, I want to talk this evening, if I can, about something that has been next slide, please, what we call the invisible crisis. And the invisible crisis is what we refer to as middle income housing affordability. Uh, Virtually no attention has been paid to this issue, and it is an absolute critical issue to all of us. So COVID has made this problem even more, as you put it, even more of a challenge for all of us. So who are we talking about when we talk about middle income? Well, we're talking about our healthcare providers. We're talking about our building trades. We're talking about law enforcement and firefighters and first responders. These are the folks, our educators, these are the folks who are the kind of the heart and soul of a community, making sure it has the services it needs in critical times and even non-critical times so that we can be successful as a community and add the dimension of a multi-economic area for people to be able to find affordable housing. So the issue that we focused on as Challenge Seattle happened to be King County. But let me be clear, it's not an issue unique to King County, but the data was there that we collected. And I want to share it with you this evening because the problem and the lessons learned and how we might construct a better future are all present there as you are addressing currently in Everett and Snohomish County. Next slide, please. So here's the problem as identified in King County. On the left-hand side, you will see there what is representative of 9 cities, the largest cities in King County, plus Seattle. And on the bottom, it's the housing growth. Meanwhile, on the top line is the job growth. On the right-hand side, again, same thing. On the bottom is the housing growth. The top is job growth, which is even greater. And interestingly enough, what that does is eliminate Seattle from the graph. So you can see what's happened over the course of the last decade in Everett, as well as in Snohomish County, as well as in King County and Seattle, is that we've had very limited housing growth to match up to the job growth that we have. Therein lies succinctly what our problem is. Next slide, please. And here we find even more graphically what happens when median home prices outpace incomes. On the bottom there, you will see what is the median household income in King County. And on the top line, you will see what the median home price is. And you can see a dramatic difference there. So what has happened, and it's happened in Everett as well, what has happened is while we've had median household income rising, but rising not to match in any way the cost that it would take to either rent or buy your own home. And so what we're finding then is people, remember now, should not have to pay more than 30% of the household income for housing. If they have to pay more than that, they are going to compromise their ability to pay for childcare and transportation, the basic necessities, and put a penny away for the future for themselves and their children. And so that's what's happening in Seattle, King County, and unfortunately, I think, in all of Puget Sound. Next slide, please. So here's where the emphasis has gone in terms of how do you build households. So I'm going to refer to this a little bit later, but let's just go through that diagram there. At the bottom, you see the amount of housing that has been done in the King County area, 27,000 homes that were low income between 2010 and 2017. 51,000 that were high income. And you see what's in the middle there. It's 11,000 for middle income, woefully inadequate to meet the job growth that's happened there. And I suspect everywhere in greater Seattle. So next slide, please. Let me show you what has happened over time. What you will see here is a graph. It's by median rent and what it will take to live in, this is King County. So you can disregard the first one, 60 to 80%, because there isn't anything that's affordable in that range. What you see then is the 80 to 100%, and then you see the yellow, which is 100 to 120, and then above 120 is pink. Look what has happened over time. If you look at 2010, yes, we have a growing number of affordability for those only 120% of median family income. But then look what's happening as you move to 2018, And then look at, we keep doing what we're doing now, the projection for 2030. We are gradually shoving out affordable housing to middle income, to low income, to everyone other than those who are above 120% or a fairly sizable income. This is rent. Now, next slide, please, shows us what happens with respect to home ownership. So again, we've already seen a dramatic problem there in terms of ownership. Look at 2010. The amount that is there, pink, above 120%, is already dominated all of King County. Then look what happens in 2018. You've lost almost all of your 80 to 100%. So all you have is 100 to 120 or above 120. And then again, if we do not take a course correction, look what happens by 2030. We virtually have only high income in the vast majority of King County, and the only thing that really is affordable is a part of South King County and both the west and the east. Next slide, please. So what happens then? So this chart is to show you a nurse, probably now is prominent in all of our minds because of COVID, as any employment might be, because we so desperately need their help right now. But this is what has happened with respect to their ability, with the income they have, which is approximately $80,000 for a registered nurse, and the cost for them to be able to support a median home purchase is $125,000. What's really telling on this chart, if you will, is look to the right. This making it such that it couldn't be affordable to nurses happened in Seattle and in Kirkland in 2013. It happened in 2014 for the area median, and happened in Renton in 2017. So what it's doing, just like the previous chart showed, is moving south, so that a nurse is having to do what? Travel long distances or really compromise the ability to pay, because she's having, or he's having to pay more than 30% of the household income in order to be able to afford a home. In Everett, the median household income is about $65,000. In Snohomish County, it's about $90,000. Neither one of those will reach the necessary mark to be able to buy a home. Since 1990, rent increase for Everett has been 162%. Home price increase has been 73%, and income increase has been 92%. So there's the definition of the problem, because the income has not matched the cost of either rent or home ownership. Next slide, please. This shows you basically a number of middle income jobs, whether it's the trades or nursing or firefighting or first responding, whatever it might be. And so you can see there on the top line is $90,000, but then you see on the right how it actually would cost $125,000 in order to afford a home. All of those people, all of those job classifications on the left, all of those families cannot afford to be able to buy a home with that number. Next slide, please. So people ask, well, what does it mean? How does it impact us? What's the difference? So let's talk a little bit about each of these. In public education, much of what we need to do is be able to attract and retain the best and the brightest to teach our children. And that's higher education at our community college there, or our WSU, or whether it's K through 12. But what is happening is these teachers can't afford to live where they work. So they're having to take the choice of move away and far away in Skagit County, for example, and you know what the result of that has been on the freeway on I-5. The other thing that happens is teachers really want to be there for their students after school. They want to help them in their classes, they want to coach, they want to do all those kinds of things. But they also need to go home to their own family. And it was one thing when it took 15, 20, even up to a half hour. It's another thing when it takes an hour or 2 hours. So that means they're not being able to devote the attention that they really want to their students and to their education and to their after school activities. Let me give you an example of what has happened in San Jose. Because of this and the lack of affordability, so many people have left that area that they have closed down 3 elementary schools and more to come. If we stay on the course that we're doing now, there's no reason for us to assume that same outcome won't happen to us. On community safety and its impact, our police and firefighters, again, who want to be in the community they serve can't afford to do so, and so are commuting long distances. We have a large utility in King County, and that utility has now only 3 of its 100 first responders to utility service that live in the area they serve. So when people who are quite wealthy say, well, it doesn't impact me because I send my child to a private school, my response to that is, well, you're going to care about the law enforcement officer, the firefighter, the utility person who can't get to your home because they've got to commute so far to do so. So this impacts, and everybody should care. Traffic congestion, I don't need to share this with you. You all know it as well as I do. You now have people who have moved north to Skagit County in order to commute. Let me give you some graphics with respect to this. In the country, we call mega commuters those who have to go 90 minutes or more each way to get to and from work. SeaTac, or Seattle, Tacoma, and Bellevue are the 3rd fastest growing mega commuter region in the country. We are beginning to lead in those who have to mega commute in order to go to work. So we as a mega region have grown by 70%. Those who now mega commute, 70% since 2010. That's the growth. There's a detriment to that, not only to the quality of life of that person who's on that freeway, to the air quality, to the quality of life, quite frankly, for all of us. So let's turn to homelessness, because it's not a separate subject from the lack of affordability for middle-income housing. There is an actual cascading effect. If people want to remain in Everett, for example, despite the fact that it's become unaffordable for them to live where they are, they can, and oftentimes do, displace lower income residences. In turn, they, as a cascading effect, some of them are quite vulnerable to ending up being homeless themselves. It has a way of concentrating wealth and poverty when you lose the middle class like that. So the lack of economic diversity can cause all kinds of problems. And one of the things that we found is in LA, with a rent increase of 2%, they found they had 4,000 homeless people. Rent increase of 2% to middle income and low income caused 4,000 people to go homeless. Now let's look a little bit at the socioeconomic diversity. Of course, it declines. That is the, in part, cascading effect. Zillow has done some studies on this and says that, in essence, when you exceed 32% of the median household income, for which you have to pay for your ability to reside there, we have a factor growth of homelessness. So those two are very much intimately tied together. This cascading effect happens everywhere. So when we focus and concentrate on just the issues facing us with regard to homelessness and low income, we cannot solve the problem. That's why the mayor is talking about we need to have affordability for every household's income, because we make the problem worse for lower income and the homeless if we don't have the ability to find affordability for middle income. On the area of economic growth and the fact that it slows, one of the edges, and the mayor knows this well, and I bet you all do as well, we have enjoyed affordability. That has allowed us to have the economic growth that we've experienced over the last decade plus. And we also have an amazing quality of life. So if you ask people why they stay, why they come, they talk predominantly about those two factors. So what is happening with regards to those two is obvious. We're lacking affordability and compromising our quality of life because we're on long commutes, we're diminishing our air quality, and we're creating financial insecurity. So we are finding trouble recruiting and retaining. We are becoming less competitive. The University of Washington and Washington State University are having trouble keeping the best and the brightest in terms of faculty and attracting and retaining others who might want to come into the area to teach. And so this lack of economic diversity is making it such that our economic prosperity for the future is going to slow, and COVID has magnified this problem, as we all know, by the number who have had to go out of business and the number that are on the edge of having to go out of business. Next slide, please. Remember, I talked a little bit about the number of houses that were made or built over the last few years, and there was 51,000 in high income, 27,000 in low income, and 11,000 in middle income. Well, this graph is to display why. On the left-hand side, over 70,000 units in the pipeline, but they are all only available to high-income folks. On the right-hand side, you see the number of folks, thank goodness, who are dedicated to looking at how do we make sure that low-income folks can make it in our communities, because they are essential to our communities as well. You have opportunities available like the Housing Trust Fund, low-income housing tax credit, HUD programs. There are a lot of programs that you can avail yourself of there in order to find the ability to build and be able to get into affordable low-income housing. You don't find those programs for middle income. Not only a lack of affordability, but no programs to turn to, because we have paid little or no attention to the fact that we are pushing middle income folks out of our communities and having them have to go and commute long distances. Next slide, please. So what we're trying to show here is there anything we can do about this? So if we were to say, what is the rent needed if we were to construct a rental mixed use in terms of income place in Seattle? For the rent, it would be about $2,800. The ability of a middle-income household to actually get there is lost because their capacity is somewhere between $1,300 and $2,700. So the three areas that we tried to focus our attention on are land, financing, and construction. All areas that the mayor and her team and your team there are trying to focus on. Next slide. Let me show you how this could work. So we start with a rent of $2,800. Is there a possibility for us to get land that is either discounted or contributed? There are actual opportunities out there. Are there opportunities in changing zoning to increase density? We'll talk more about that in just a moment. Can we encourage transit-oriented development? Can we support job growth in those areas where there is opportunity for that kind of housing? In the financing, can we provide low market loans? We could shave off $200 to $300 a month in rent if we could do so. Can we provide patient below market equity? Again, $100 to $200. Extend the housing tax incentives to middle income, again, $200. A number of things there. And then look down at construction. Can we reduce the expensive to build parking requirements, not here necessarily in Everett or Snohomish County, but a sizable factor in Seattle and King County, which could, if located around a transit, draw down the amount monthly from $100 to $300. Can we reduce the impact in other development fees, which could reduce by $100? And the issue that the mayor talked about, the permitting process. If you go to any builder, they will tell you The cost of construction in Seattle and King County makes it impossible to be able to build middle income because of the lack of timeliness in getting the permits, which is money, the lack of predictability in terms of what the permit will require is money. And those two issues contribute dramatically to whether they can afford to build middle income housing. And that's why I assume you're looking at that issue and doing what you can there. Next slide, please. So, I'm sorry, but just a moment. Before we go, what we were able to do there with those, and some of those are long-term ideas, but what we were able to do is reduce from 2,800 to rent of 1,700 to 2,100, making it more affordable for middle income households. So you can see there are actions that can be taken to address the problem. Next slide. So here's my, if you will, my pyramid on how we approach this. This cannot be done by the private sector, the building industry alone. This cannot be done by government and public policies alone. And this can't be done by our community alone. It's going to take all three working together to be able to make this possible. In the private investment and contributions, we talked a little bit about that in the previous slide. And we also talked about smart public policies and incentives to build middle income housing. So what can the community do? Well, I know it's hard. I understand it fully, but we have to embrace change. If we fail, the outcome that we saw is not a community we want to live in, where we can't call the law enforcement officer and get the response time we want, or the firefighter, or the paramedic, or the guy who works for the utility. We all need to understand we're going to have to open up our minds to the ability to make some changes. I know in Seattle, use of the word density is a 4-letter word. It has to be among the items that we have to take a look at. We don't have a choice. We have to look at the different kinds of housing types and ask ourselves, how can we meet the needs of a person for that person? Not everything's a cookie cutter approach. We have to meet them where their needs are. And are there ways that we can look at ADUs or triplexes? And again, I know this is hard. I know this is change, but we will not like, as Washingtonians, the outcome if we're not willing to embrace change. So this is a glimpse, if you will, of what we see happening in the Puget Sound region. But I thought I would take you for just a brief moment to a bigger scale. Next slide, please. We are a part of what we call the Cascadia mega region. And we developed a vision for 2050 about how this mega region can be the most sustainable mega region in the world. What is a mega region? We are one of 11 in the United States, one of about 25 worldwide. They are economic powerhouses. And what it means, if you come together, work together, you can prosper together. You can work on such things as we put our cancer research agencies together, and they're finding cures to cancer because they are better collectively than they are individually. So that's what Cascadia is about. Well, we wanted to look at how could we be the first in the world sustainable region. And so, next slide, please. We started to take a look at exactly who we are and what we could do. So our mega region starts in Vancouver, British Columbia, through Seattle, down to Portland, Oregon. That is considered the Cascadia corridor. We added innovation because that's what we think is our reputation worldwide, and that's our economic prosperity for the future if we capitalize on it. Next slide. Here's what's happened in the Cascadia region, which I think brings home that this is not an Everett issue, it's not a Snohomish issue, or a Seattle or a King County, but this is an entire regional issue from Vancouver, British Columbia. We're one of the few that crosses an international border, to Portland, Oregon, crossing another state border. Look at what's happened to the population and look at what the projections are. 1990 from 5.7 million to 2050 to 12 to 13 million. GDP 1990, 200 billion, 2050, 1.5 trillion. Median income 1990, 34,000, by 2050, 150,000. we try to define what does sustainability mean, it means affordability. It means we're not letting emissions from transportation go. It means that we have a quality of life that we all want. Next slide, please. Here's the projections that we will increase congestion up and down this corridor, of which we are a major part, by 30% if we stay on the course we are on right now. And that assumes that we increase our use of autonomous vehicles and ST3 investments. So that has included the positive course that we're on in many respects, but it clearly isn't enough. That will be a 30% increase in congestion. 21% increase in income spent on housing. We can ill afford it now. We know we could never afford a 21% increase. And our goals, the Paris Accord, if we were to achieve that, we will find that we have a 73% increase. Today we are holding our own, but we are not cutting back. This is what happens if we're not able to meet the needs of the future. Next slide, please. So here's how we think this can be and will be dealt with. We estimate 3.6 million people more up and down the corridor. With all the actions that are being considered here by your mayor, by Snohomish County, by Puget Sound, with anything from the kinds of houses to density to permit processing to land availability, all of those things, we believe if all of that is done, we can absorb 2.3 million additional people, leaving us a gap of 1.3 million. So we're going to have to find some alternatives to be able to deal with the future. We offer one idea in our document, but we are the first to say it's not the only idea, but we need to think bold and we need to think fast, because we won't like the outcome if we stay on the course we're on now. So again, it's going to take all of us. It is a formidable challenge compounded by COVID, but working together, we can all step up to this challenge and leave a legacy to our children that we'll be proud of. With that, Mayor, thanks for the chance.
Oh, thank you so much, Governor. I really appreciate the visual representations of the crisis that we're facing and ensuring that we address middle-income housing, that we tackle this challenge of ensuring housing at all price points are available in our greater region. And so, thank you for bringing all of those highlights to our attention. Do you have a few minutes for just a couple of questions?
Oh, my pleasure. You bet.
Great. So perhaps we can go back to, there. I can see your face then rather than the PowerPoint screen. So, first question that comes to mind, when I think about some of the challenges around housing and how personal it is, what are some of the challenges that you have seen with communities and neighborhoods accepting the idea of changes? You talked about how change is hard, but we have to embrace this change. And so those changes in single family neighborhoods are exceptionally hard. And so what are some of the challenges that you've seen in communities in accepting these changes?
Well, Mayor, let me offer a suggestion. I understand some of why we are where we are. I mean, let's assume that you could afford to buy a home and you bought the home and you raised your family and your family's gone. And now it's you and your spouse in this nice, large home. But you can't afford to sell it because where are you going to go? So we need to find ways to talk to those people about the possibility of them looking at some alternative housing that can be constructed in a way that will see them to the end of their lives in a comfortable way and allow for the home they're in to either be upgraded, preserved, which is an option that can be used, an ADU that's put on in addition to it, and so on. Density in the neighborhood. These are all issues that, again, I said it before, but are really hard for people to accept. We can see how we got where we were. We're in a transition period, a generational transition period. But we need to, as you're doing, communicate with the public at large. If the community knows that we're going to leave a lack of quality of life, I believe fundamentally they'll step up. But they can't be told this is what you're going to do. They need to engage, like what you're referring to. I've seen what has happened by city councils who voted for density without communicating, without engaging, without having a robust debate and dialogue, and without looking at the data and the reality of what the future brings if we do nothing. And they have failed. They have failed. When we did our middle income report, let me tell you some bad news, which is we went global. I interviewed folks in New Zealand, in Great Britain, and other countries. I asked them fundamentally, have you looked at this issue? What have you done? They're all looking at the issue, and none of them had and here's the silver bullet. But every one of them said, but let us be clear, because they're ahead of us, to be honest with you. Every one of them said, if you don't engage as a community to make the change, it won't happen. Everybody needs to know what you know about the future and what the data shows and the consequences of inaction. And if they know, then they come together, help you problem solve, and help you get to a better future for not only them and their family, but future families. So that's the lessons that I've learned from scoping this work around the world.
Is a great lesson, and I couldn't agree more. I think the decisions we make when we include the entire community in the conversation will be all the better, all the more informed, and we'll be thinking about all of the perspectives as we try to tackle this. And I think once our community kind of understands what's in store if we don't enact some changes, I think they'll be excited to work with us on those changes. So very, very good insights. Another question I have is, we don't typically see private sector businesses involved in housing issues. So can you share more with us how you see large employers, large companies here in our region, how they can help solve our housing problems?
So let me tell you a story which got us to even look at this issue. And that was an individual who's the president of Microsoft, Brad Smith by name, was downtown in Redmond and was talking to the police chief there. And it was a friendly exchange about, well, how's your family? And the police chief said, well, we've moved. Sorry to say this, Cassie, but moved to Monroe. And the Bellevue chief has moved to Snohomish. And Brad was surprised and said, well, isn't that hard for you in the commute? And they said very clearly, so we're working very odd hours now to try and spend quality time with our family. Why did you do that? We couldn't afford to live here anymore. We couldn't afford the housing. That then brought that issue to the attention of the folks that I deal with, which are a lot of the large companies, whether it's Boeing or Microsoft or Starbucks. And everybody said, that's not a community I want to live in. When the law enforcement officer and the police chief can't live there, that's not a community that we want to have. And then we started talking more graphically because we have an individual who's the president of Kaiser Permanente, who said, my nurses can't afford to live there and I can't recruit doctors now. All of that gave these CEOs a sense of urgency. This is not what we want. We need to help. So the first one out of the blocks, of course, was Microsoft, donating $500 million to try and address the issue. They gave $25 million directly for homelessness, but the rest is dedicated to low income and middle income. Weyerhaeuser stepped up, and I think you might be familiar with cross-laminated timber, particularly in Snohomish County. Yeah. That holds great promise for us. And there's demonstration projects on the campus at the University of British Columbia now that's showing what you can do with that. And Weyerhaeuser has volunteered to help, donate some, and so on. At the same time, Zillow has volunteered to give us access to data and information so folks like you can really have an eye into what's going on with the marketplace and where's the problem and how can we address it. These companies have a vested interest in, yes, having affordable housing for their own folks, for their suppliers, for their contractors, but also for the teachers and the builders and the law enforcement in their own backyard. and they say it's not a community if you don't have that diversity of income. So low and middle income homeowners and renters should be in every community. So that's how we got started and why we feel so passionate about the issue.
It's so good to hear that our major employers are passionate about addressing this. I think a lot of folks think the problem exists more in King County, and I know a lot of the data you used were King County centric, but the problem is definitely in Everett. We are absolutely missing inventory and not building housing for those middle income working families, whether they're teachers or nurses or firefighters, EMS. We have 1,100 people working at the city of Everett, and many of our team members have to commute from outside of Everett to come to Everett to work. And so I absolutely recognize this challenge, and I appreciate you engaging the business community leaders in it. So I guess the final question I wanted to ask you this evening is, what impacts the pandemic is having on our supply and housing affordability, and how we get out of this. The pandemic has impacted all of us in every aspect of our life. And I think of the challenge of housing that existed before COVID-19 hit the world, and now it's only exacerbated it. So can you speak a little bit more to that?
So I can speak to what's happening in Seattle. And
sure.
I think that's quite interesting. They were on a trajectory of increasing housing costs, rent and home ownership. And interestingly enough, in the middle of COVID, it has continued. While people have not only, stagnated at their salaries, many have lost their jobs, many businesses have gone out, and yet housing costs are rising. I'm not sure intuitively we would have expected that to happen, but that is in fact what is happening. The other thing I will tell you is that the disproportionate impact on people of color is pretty dramatic. And what we're finding is the inability of too many people, particularly people of color, to be able to pass wealth on to the next generation because they haven't been able to afford a home. And COVID has made that ×2. So we're seeing that very clearly. There's a lot of thought now that people think, well, I'm working from home. Why can't I go live wherever? Why can't I live in another state or another country because I'm working from home? And so we've actually looked back in history where there have been crises or moments in time where people's behavior has had to dramatically change. And was that changed behavior sustained over time? And we have found it has not. So assuming that everybody's going to work from home for the rest of their lives may not be the right assumption. Assuming that they're going to be able to live far away and be able to work from home is probably not the right assumption. One of the things we need to remember is people love living in Everett. My husband loved living in Everett. My mother-in-law and father-in-law and my brother-in-law loved living in Everett. So the idea that you can get the same satisfaction by living remotely or in Seattle, it isn't there. And if you look at the generations, the younger generations, they're not interested in doing that. They want to be able to walk to this and walk to that and take high-speed transportation and so on. So I think COVID has had, for obvious reasons, human life most particularly, but a dramatic impact on housing affordability, and where we see ourselves going in the future in terms of working from home. So I don't assume that all this stays with us at all based on history, but rather we are going to gravitate back to cities that we love, and we love the vibrancy of the city and the history behind it and so on. And we don't want to have to commute 2 hours in order to find it affordable. So lessons learned from COVID that are hard, some good lessons learned from COVID that we need to step up to the challenge, or we're not going to like the future that holds for us.
Well, thank you, Governor. I agree. I love living in Everett as well. I love this community, and I know that is what draws most people to Everett is just the love of this beautiful city and the people here and the history of our city. And I agree. As much as some are enjoying the remote, I think many are getting sick of the remote work, and they look forward to the day where we can be together. I agree that cities are going to need to prepare for the post-COVID world and address the challenges that existed before COVID that the pandemic has only exacerbated. You're so correct. Well, again, Governor, thank you so much for your time this evening, sharing your perspective on housing with us. I really appreciated the presentation. I know our community will appreciate it, and I look forward to sharing progress with you on our initiative and the work that we're doing. We've certainly heard tonight that this issue is challenging, and though this all seems insurmountable, I believe that we as a community can work together to make housing attainable. I think the first step, as we shared, is tuning in and getting engaged. So thank you all that have tuned in this evening. This is our first step together, and thank you for your patience as we dealt with our tech challenges. But I really invite you to continue to engage in this process. And any of you that are watching either tonight or later, please participate in our next forum. Our keynote speaker next time will be Nan Roman, President and CEO of the National Alliance to End Homelessness. This forum will focus on strategies for addressing homelessness, and we'll hear about the homelessness landscape, housing needs, the national best practices that could help Everett address this issue. So please join us for that on Thursday, January 14th at 2:30 p.m. Additional information about Rethink Housing Action Plan process and upcoming events can be found on our website at everettwa.gov, Rethink Housing, or contact our city teams. And again, Governor Gregoire, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to our community for tuning in, and I wish you all a happy and safe holiday season. So have a good night.